webinars is to share best practices and lessons learned so that we can not only expand access for healthcare to vulnerable populations, but increase the quality of it so that it's not only evidence-based, but it's culturally relevant, effective, and empowering. So to that end, the University of Memphis has developed a series of 6 one-hour webinars related to telehealth for vulnerable populations. We're very excited. Today's topic is engaging caregivers and setting up the home environment, the how-tos of healthcare delivery. And let me share my screen. We have an interdisciplinary panel of experts. One is social worker, a behavioral analyst, and a speech language pathologist. And I'll introduce them briefly. The first speaker is Dr. Gregory Washington, who's an associate professor in the Department of Social Work at the University of Memphis. He's director of the Center for Advancement of Youth Development and co-director of the Mid-South Institute for Family and Community Empowerment. Dr. Washington is a licensed clinical social worker. Dr. Laura Casey is a professor at the University of Memphis. She received her doctorate in educational psychology and is a board-certified behavior analyst. She also completed master's degrees in community counseling and in educational psychology and is a nationally certified counselor and a nationally certified school psychologist. Dr. Casey co-directs the Autism, Behavior, and Communication program at the University of Memphis, now termed Umbrella. Ms. Catherine Mendez is a bilingual speech-language pathologist specializing in language, literacy, and executive function. She currently works as a clinical supervisor at the University of Memphis, in addition to having her own private practice. She previously worked as a bilingual diagnostician for Shelby County Schools and has several years' experience as a research associate and medical interpreter. So we have a very strong panel. I know that you'll be delighted with their presentations. Just want to take a moment to share the logos and thank our participating organizations for their sponsorship of the series of webinars. And before we begin, I'd like to share some housekeeping information. Each panelist will have 10 minutes. And at the end of all 3 presentations, we will have a question and answer session. So at any time, you can go to the question and answer box and type in a question that you'd like to ask. And if you don't mind, please specify which presenter you'd like to ask the question. CEUs will be, for CEUs, you'll receive an email to complete a survey evaluation at the end of the webinar. Once you complete the survey, you will be directed to where you can get your CEUs. And you will also be directed to access slides in the presentations at this website. You don't need to copy this down. You will receive an email that provides the link to these presentations and also to the survey. For behavior analysts, they need to use the CEU helper, and I think Laura, Dr. Casey has provided the link in the chat box. So those of you who are behavior analysts, you need to go to that, use that app and check in with the code 5128 within the first 5 minutes of the start of this webinar, and check out with the code 6869 at the last 5 minutes. So it's 5128 at the beginning, 6869 at the end. And I think now it's time for me to turn the webinar over to Dr. Gregory Washington, our first presenter.
Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Levy. How's my sound? Good? All right. Very good, very good. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to start right away. Make sure I can get my screen up. And if someone can just confirm that they can see that well. Someone want to unmute and just kind of confirm for me?
We can see it. You're good to go.
All right, very good. Thank you very much. All right then. So first thing, I just want to clarify a couple of things. I'm actually a full professor in the School of Social Work, and my current administrative responsibility is director of the Center for the Advancement of Youth Development. And we have multiple resources there, and we connect with multiple communities around the city. If you're interested in more about those resources and how you can work with us, you can go to the School of Social Work website, and we have a link there, or you can go directly to CAYD, Center for the Advancement of Youth Development. So one of the things I want to do was kind of just share my perspective as a social worker. I've worked as a social worker in urban homes and rural homes of multi-ethnic components in Illinois, Georgia, Arkansas, and Mississippi. So I've been in a clinical capacity, direct service capacity, administrative capacities. So, and still have a small clinical practice that's keeping me quite busy now, primarily with families who've been impacted by trauma here. So, so things to remember, things that I try to remember. I recognize that the distrust and suspicion may be some self-protective mechanisms that I encounter by people who are coping with threatening environments, and particularly among cultural groups who are stigmatized and targeted and have been targeted for dehumanization and systematic oppression and constraint. So it's important for me to be clear about that and have that in my mind. Even people who look like me may not necessarily connect with me in the way that I think. I need to be sensitive. Despite my sincere intent, I'm associated in some regards with racist and oppressive institutions. So I need to be clear about that. I need to be understanding about that. And that may be a barrier, but it's something that over the years I've been able to navigate. And so we talk about that. So how do we navigate that? You know, so one of the things that I talk about and I utilize in the work I do is this, the philosophies around cultural humility, you know, which for me is kind of more relevant than cultural competency, because it doesn't give me the possible danger of thinking that I can be competent in truly understanding someone else's culture. Again, even though they may look like me and I think I relate to them, it's important that I understand that there's a certain amount of humility I have to go into. And so it's a process of self-reflection and discovery in order to be honest and trustworthy in these relationships. You know, for me, it requires a lifelong process of self-reflection and self-critique. So not only do I learn about another culture, but also have to continually examine where I am and how I view and see my own culture, you know, whether it be white privilege or middle class privilege. I have to kind of do this self-reflection, self-critique, and understanding my own assumptions about this. Understanding of others and being open to learning. So as I proceed with that kind of contextual understanding, there's some core social work practices that I kind of want to share and talk about. One, of course, is this whole idea around engagement. And for me, this means primarily listening to families, listening to their strengths, listening for their strengths and their need. So it requires me to be intentional and not be rigid. It requires me intentional and open to look for strengths. And this can be challenging, but I need to be intentional. I need to get consultation, supervision where important, where needed, because it may not look familiar or I may not quite understand. So again, I have to be humble and be willing to kind of look at that piece. The next The next practice piece is this whole piece around envisioning. By that I mean, when we're talking about telehealth, one of the things that I've experienced and I've researched is that, I'll just say it like this: everybody's not feeling telehealth techniques, and so they may not be comfortable with them. They may not understand them, and so we have to help families envision the fact that they can interact in this way, and in fact help them understand the research supporting the effectiveness of telehealth techniques. So we have to help families envision, an improved reality that includes this relationship that I have virtually with them, whether it be just a telephone, or for those families who are fortunate enough to have internet access and they can download Zoom and we can interact in that way, or Google Duo, or FaceTime, whatever is available. Again, it's important for me to be able to be flexible in that regard. So in that regard, I have to respect any hesitancy regarding wanting to be involved in telehealth kind of relationships, and compassionately encourage engagement. Next, as the engagement continues, it's important for me to, again, and these practices don't necessarily flow in this order, but it's important for me to assess the technology capacity in the household. Again, how familiar are they with some of these methods? What do they actually have available to them? And how I can be supportive of upgrading to additional technology, but also respecting where they are and being flexible to them utilizing whatever they have, whatever level of comfort exists. Let me do another sound check in. I would hate to be talking on and nobody can hear me.
Sound is
Can I
perfect.
get it?
You're
Can I
fine.
get it? Amen. Okay. All right. Good. All right. So, so again, it's important to interact in a way that's comfortable with the families. Right now, that's a lot of telehealth, and encouraging them to do that, but also assessing their capacity for upgrade, encouraging them, if they have access to tablets and laptops, to try to download Zoom apps and other platform apps. So when given the opportunity, I want to actively intervene. And again, first, that looks like listening. It looks like understanding where they are. Social workers, we meet people where they are, okay? We have to be careful about coming in with our own agenda, and we have to be careful about listening to what are the most urgent concerns or needs of the families that we're interacting with. We've been privileged enough, if we've been given access, if they're taking the risk to allow us to engage, then we have to be very respectful and listen to what it is that their most urgent concerns and needs. We have to respect limitations in space, privacy, and time. It may not look ideally what we would like it to look like in telehealth interaction, given limitations in space, time, even privacy, okay? It may look like walking somewhere and you're interacting with them. It may look like a lot of communication in the background. It look like a lot of children in the background. You set it for a particular time, it happens sometime later, okay? Or it happens for a shorter period of time. We have to respect what that is. And so consequently, we have to be prepared to adapt our intervention. We have to be prepared to make it look like what it needs to look like. That may require consultation, and really it requires partnerships with the families we're working with. And lastly, I just want to reemphasize this piece around building upon existing strengths. We're dealing with families and communities that have survived hundreds of years of oppression and racism. So Sadie Logan talks about mutual aid systems, mutual aid networks that are in place. So they have strengths that we need to recognize and build upon. Every family is going to be different. They don't look the same. So with that, I want to end there, and hopefully that's been helpful. But I'll pass on to my colleagues at this point. I will share one more screen, which includes the references.
Okay, thank you so much, Greg. That was a really great introduction to how we can work with individuals via telehealth, and to remind us to be compassionate and to meet them where they are. Those were very key concepts that I think go across all of our fields, right? We are there for the families and for the children, and we're not there to impose. We're there to help. And it's so important to meet them and to help them prioritize and to listen. So thank you for that. I'm going to share my screen at this time. At least that's my plan. Okay. Are we up and running? Okay.
That's great.
Excellent.
Looks good.
Okay, so my talk today will hopefully build upon Dr. Washington's talk and really help y'all set the stage. Keeping in mind throughout this whole conversation that I'm about to go into, we need to remember those key and core concepts that Dr. Washington mentioned about the family and what they're going through, and we're guests in their home, and that sets a different stage for our sessions. So telehealth basically is just the delivery of health-related services via technology. It can be telephone, it can be web if they're fortunate enough to have internet access. It can also be whatever they're comfortable with to help them in that moment and in that time that's not face-to-face. We have found that it is cost-effective. It often breaks those barriers down in underserved communities related to transportation, related to having to find childcare for them to come into their appointment if the meeting is for them. If the meeting is for their child, then it enables them not to have to find childcare for the siblings. All of those are important, and we're also able to observe them and engage them in the natural setting. But keep in mind that it is a natural setting. So like Dr. Washington was mentioning, we have to be very cautious and accepting of what might go on in the background. It's just going to be part of being real and being in the moment. So the thing that I wanted to start with is, as the clinician, what do you need to do? So some of the basics are: make sure you've got Wi-Fi. Be prepared, right? If you know you're in an area where your Wi-Fi can be spotty, relocate yourself somewhere that you're not going to have those issues with connectivity. Be sure that you're in a quiet space. While we can't guarantee what's going to happen in the background of the others that we're working with, and we don't want that to be contrived, we do need to try to contrive our own setting so that we can control and look as professional as possible. We're providing a service as a professional. So I want you to think about, what does your background say? They can see your background. It's just like stepping into your office, because your home has now become your office, and you don't want it to look like last night a tornado came through. You want it to be professional. You also want to make sure that you communicate ahead of time with your client and make sure that they're equipped. Send them a note ahead of time, a reminder. Put it on their calendar that we've got this coming up. Is it still going to work? Is it still going to work in the capacity that we planned on it working? If Zoom isn't going to work, do we need to do telephone today? Be sure you talk with them ahead of time. Also, be prepared for audio issues. And if something's going on and you might need to use speakers or headphones, have all that ready. Have your notes there. Have your case notes from the previous session. Have everything out so that you are prepared just as if you would be in in your clinic if they were coming to see you, or if we were doing home visits. I do a lot of work and run projects where we go into the homes as early interventionists. And it's so important we have everything ready. We're building on one skill set to another, and if we're not prepared, then we can't do our best job to get them to the next level. I also want to say it's easy as a clinician or as a professor, if I'm teaching a class and I know it's on Zoom, for me to try to cram 100 things in right before I start my Zoom. And if you're doing that, you're not prepared. So go ahead and get in the mindset of having that drive into work. You're not really going to have that drive, but allow yourself that 30 minutes or 20 minutes to get in the mindset, to make sure you have everything ready, to not be, I'm going to do this and this and this, and then click Zoom and go, and then I'm going to go back and do this, this, and this. You need to have that time to hit reset and be prepared. Like this guy down on the bottom, like he's clearly just hanging out, eating breakfast in bed and hoping that it's going to work. And if our clients see that, that can come across as being very disrespectful to them. And we want to show the utmost respect, even in the telehealth environment. So I kind of talked about how to keep yourself engaged and prepared, but what can we do for the client? Like I found this pie chart, and what it really reminded me of was, especially in COVID, yeah, it's great. We're seeing other humans, right? And that's wonderful. But at the same time, they're checking out our houses, right? They're looking at themselves. Think about that. It's a mirror that's holding up in front of them when they're sharing their inner world to us, or they're sharing with their child and what their child needs to us. They're also looking at themselves in the mirror because they can see themselves. Just like I can see myself right now talking and engaging in their mannerisms. And we want them to be relaxed and not worried about, what am I looking like? What are my emotions coming across as? They wouldn't be worried about that if they were in our clinic. And so we want to make sure that they know we accept them as they are. It's okay if they sniffle during the meeting. It's okay if they have to remove a cat from the keyboard, or tell the dog to be quiet, or have a kid running through. All of those are opportunities too for us as clinicians to live in the moment and to use those opportunities to teach, especially if we're coaching and the parent is the coach and we're working with the child and we see another sibling dash through behind them. Maybe that's an opportunity for us to do some sibling work and to say, hey, I really see that your son, he wants to be an active part of this. Let's bring him into this. How can he help? And you can work on things like that so that they don't feel like that was a disruption or they're embarrassed. So think about that mirror that they're able to see and how that adds another layer, another layer of uncertainty to them in the moment. So just some reminders, you do want to feel like you can just reach through that computer and shake their hand. You want to reach through and be warm, and they need to know that you're warm. You need to be present. Try not to be the octopus doing 8 different things down there at the same time. Not before the session, and specifically not during the session. They can tell if you're not engaged and if you're not really into them, and that's not fair. We're providing a service and they're seeking our services and our expertise, and we need to be 100% in the moment with them. Do show your face. I know that's hard. It's so easy for us to want to hit no video, or for us to put a background and to look like we're, I don't know, in the Bahamas or somewhere. But let them see your home. Let them see your face. Let them know that you're human too, and you're going through all of this with them. It's also okay to have silence and to embrace that silence when it's appropriate. Sometimes if you pose a question to the client or you ask them to do stuff and there's silence, let it be for a minute and then re-engage and reflect and have that active listening. I notice that you're silent right now, and that's okay. Can I help you think through something? Can we work through something together? What is it that we can do? Keep your feedback really specific. A lot of times it is difficult when you're doing these webinars or these Zoom meetings and you want to just ask yes or no questions, but make sure it's specific and it's specific to them and relative to them. A lot of this kind of is going to reiterate what Dr. Washington said, but be flexible on the session length. If you feel like, it's just not a good time, say it's okay. Let's take a break. Let's reconvene. When is this appropriate? Or if you feel like you've accomplished a whole lot and it just didn't take that long, that's okay too. Go ahead and wrap things up. Be prepared to improvise. That's an opportunity for you to work with them and to help them see, if I'm working with my kid on my own outside of a session, but this opportunity arises, how can I roll with it? Teach them how to be flexible. Use a lot of reflection. Really get into it. Try not to be yes, no, stop, don't do that. Let them get comfortable with it. You want to empower your client too, especially if you're using a coaching model. In ABA, we do a lot of parent training. In early intervention, we do a lot of parent training. We want to make sure that we are empowering those parents to be change agents. We don't want them dependent upon us because they're the primary people that are going to be working with their child and they know their child best. So we want to make sure that they feel like they've got the success and the strategies to really change what they want to change. So empower them as much as you can via telehealth. Remember too that sometimes nonverbal feedback doesn't transfer well electronically, whether that's an email, whether that's in telephone, whether that's in a Zoom. Sometimes the nonverbal feedback can just be a little different, particularly like if you're thinking like an email you send them and you accidentally have your caps locked and everything's in caps and they think you're screaming at them. And that's not the case, but be aware that could have come across that way. So be really careful when you're doing those things, just like you would in person. Always be genuine. Start the session getting to know them. End the session saying goodbye, just like you would in real time. It is easy to just click leave meeting and be done, but it's important that you refresh them with what you just learned, remind them of where you're going and what their goals are, tell them some homework and some activities that can help them get through the next session, send them a reminder and a really nice farewell so that it's not an abrupt ending, that it's just like in a clinic. When's your next appointment? This is how we'd like to set things up. So if you have any questions for me, I know mine was kind of more of a task analysis, like a detailed step-by-step of how to get this going, but I hope that it built all of Dr. Washington's very compassionate, let's think about the individual and think about our biases and keep all that in context. And I hope that it also sets the stage for Catherine Mendez's talk too, and how she'll really get into working with the families. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Casey and Dr. Washington. Yeah, what I'm going to talk about is kind of some practical aspects of setting the stage so that we have the situation as ideal as possible, keeping in mind all of the different components we need to just accept what can we control. So let me share my screen. Okay, is everybody seeing my screen? Yes, okay, wonderful, thank you.
Catherine, can you press swap displays? It went back to the presenter's view.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, there we go.
Perfect.
Okay, so a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is stuff that we have worked through. We here at Memphis Speech and Hearing Center have had to work through since we moved to telehealth. It's been kind of a steep learning curve, but we've learned some important lessons. One of the first things we had to learn to ask ourselves and work through is, are telehealth services actually appropriate? Some things we need to think about is the nature of the service being provided. Speech language pathologists do language and speech, and those things work pretty well through telehealth, but we also do swallowing and voice. those often require instrumentation and sometimes physical touch that really isn't possible through telehealth. And so we have to be clear and honest about whether or not telehealth is actually appropriate. We also need to think about the characteristics of the child. The child individually, just as a human, and also the characteristics of any disorder they might have that might make telehealth services either more or less appropriate. We also need to keep in mind the characteristics of the caregiver and family. A lot of that Dr. Washington and Dr. Casey talked about. Some of them may simply not be interested in this type of service, and that has to be okay. The characteristics of the home environment should be considered. If the home environment isn't one that lends itself well to telehealth services, or that we feel like the quality or the actual efficacy of the services is going to be compromised by the telehealth model, we need to talk about that with our parents and see what we think is the ethical choice to make there. Always keeping in mind the tech and devices that the parent has available. We have had families that the phone is really the only option available. That works fine for some of our parent coaching clients. I work with literacy, where we're also, the children need to be able to read and interact with the screen and write things. And in that case, the phone really doesn't do the trick. Also considering internet speed and reliability and insurance coverage. Now we've gotten to a place where insurance is covering a lot of telehealth services currently, but they haven't always. And so whether or not insurance is covering the service is an important consideration for families. So what we have discovered when we made this switch is that there are various different ways to make telehealth work as far as how you interact with the client or the parent. One of the ways is parent coaching, and this is one of the two that I use the most. Parent coaching is actually, your discussion and attention is directed largely at the parent, and the intervention itself happens between sessions. For some of our parent coaching sessions, the child doesn't even really, they usually are running past, but sometimes they don't even need to be there. I use video recordings often so that the parent can get a recording at a time that is practical and appropriate for them, and then we can watch that during our session together. Another option, and this one, people call this one parent coaching, and they're different things as far as I'm concerned. Parent coaching is directed at the parent. Clinician-directed parent-mediated intervention is what some folks are doing, which means they are teaching or guiding the parent through an activity with the child on the other side of the screen. For some of these clinicians, they're planning activities like they would in the therapy setting with materials that they think that the parent has or have confirmed that the parent has. And then they actually guide the parent to really serve in the same capacity that the clinician would in the structured activity in the therapy setting. A third model that I'm seeing being used is directing the activities directly to the child through the screen, but having the parent there to facilitate things like clicking on things or just kind of keeping the child where they need to be. We've seen some funny videos and pictures of parents who had walked away from a 2 or 3-year-old that was left to hopefully interact with their therapist, and the child is just gone, and the therapist is like, come back. So we usually need the parent to kind of keep them on task. And then the fourth kind is really this direct connection with the child, and really the parent doesn't need to be there. With most of my literacy kids, this is where we are. The parent doesn't need, these kids are older, they're able to manipulate the technology, and so the parent really doesn't need to be particularly involved in that case. The next part, once you've decided that telehealth services are appropriate, is you need to figure out which of those models or some combination of those models is actually appropriate for that child and family. So is the child able to attend to the clinician on the screen, or maybe some things they can attend and some things they can't? Is that child able to do so independently? Does the child enjoy interacting through the screen? Figuring this out should really help you decide which of those models is going to work best for your family. The other component, besides what's going to work best for the child, is figuring out what's going to work best for that caregiver. What is the home environment like? Is there a quiet space where the child can focus their attention? Will the caregiver need to be attending to multiple children at the same time? If so, then maybe asking that parent to corral one child and keep them near your screen isn't the appropriate ask in that case. What other demands is the caregiver dealing with? Are they trying to work from home? Are they caring for multiple children? Are they caring for parents? Do they have health issues, safety issues, financial issues, food insecurity? Are they a non-English speaker? Are they hearing impaired? All of those things have to factor into whether or not whichever model you choose is really going to be a good fit. Another important component that we've kind of touched on already is how much cognitive and emotional bandwidth does the caregiver have to devote to therapy? Different models here ask more of the parent. Parent coaching, when we're asking the parent to really do their thing between sessions, that's a bigger ask than asking the parent to sit behind the child and keep them, directed at the screen for the therapy session. I love parent coaching, and it's always the one that I am most happy with, but sometimes there are parents dealing with children, multiple children with disabilities, dealing with food insecurity, dealing with so many things that me asking that of them is just not appropriate at this time. And the other question is, are there cultural factors that will make one model a better fit over the other? And that really has to be determined by the family and figuring out what's really going to be effective. So as far as engaging the caregiver, what do we mean by engage? And Merriam-Webster defines engage as to hold the attention of or to induce to participate. But what we mean by participate is going to depend largely on which of those therapy models we go with. So for the ones where the parent is just walking through some activity that we are directing, or where they are just corralling the child near the screen, then we're just really asking that caregiver to follow our instructions, right? Just during the session. Or do we mean that we want that caregiver to follow our instructions between sessions? Something like following instructions is really not engagement, in my opinion. That's more like compliance. If we want to engage a parent, to me, that word means that we want them to be an invested partner. And we need to think about what that means. That's where, for me, the parent coaching comes in. That makes a big difference in having a partnership with the parent where they are genuinely engaged. And then the next and kind of the last thing before you get started on a session is to set those clear expectations with the family and clearly explain the delivery model that you're going to try using. Explain the evidence supporting that model in caregiver-friendly language. When I have done the parent coaching through teletherapy, it has helped a lot for me to say, no, we have evidence on this. This works. I know this feels maybe a little not what you expected when you wanted speech therapy or when you wanted language therapy, but we have the evidence that this works. We want to explain very explicitly what will be required of the caregiver and ask that caregiver to commit to doing their part. Some providers have a parent contract just so that the parent makes a conscious choice to say, yes, I understand what I'm committing to here. And if they can't commit, that's okay, but we need to change our delivery model perhaps then to one of the models that they feel comfortable with. Overall, we've just discovered that being thoughtful and intentional about how the therapy will be delivered and communicating that clearly to parents has set the stage for the therapy itself to be much more effective. And that is the end of what I had to say today. So I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Levy.
Thank you so much. All three presentations were very interesting. I've learned a lot. So I want to open it to our participants, the people who are attending. If you have any questions, put the questions in the question and answer box. And until we receive some questions, I thought I would ask Catherine. Catherine, can you explain a little bit more about parent coaching?
Sure. As I mentioned, parent coaching is one of my loves in our field. The difference between parent coaching and kind of the directing the parent to do some kind of therapy activity through the screen is that it's parent-led. We view the parent as the expert on their child, their needs, their environment, their strengths, all those things. And I come in as the language expert and I say, okay, let's bring our knowledge together and collaborate to figure out how what I know can help you reach your goals. I also love the idea of building the capacity and the confidence that parents have in what they're capable of doing. There's a lot of parents with children with disabilities are made to think that they're not the one that can help their child, that they don't have the skills, that it must be, they need some kind of professional to do that. And it's really a wonderful thing to be a part of showing the parent that, no, you can do this. We'll figure out the ways that work best for you and your family. You can parent your child's language development the same way any other parent can. So it's a long conversation learning about parent coaching, because it's really a change in the kind of the paradigm, how this is going to work. But I encourage anybody who really doesn't feel comfortable with it yet to really dig deeper into that knowledge base, because I can't say enough good things about it.
That's great. The parent is the expert.
Yeah.
That's great. Laura, let me ask you a question. This is an interdisciplinary team that we have on the webinar. How can interdisciplinary work, an interdisciplinary team work in early intervention?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So interdisciplinary by nature means that we are all on the same page. So the social worker, the speech pathologist, the behavior analyst, we've all worked with this kid, we've all worked with this family, we've all reviewed their progress notes. We know what each other, we know what we're doing, and we know what the other hand is doing. And so what that can do is help better support that parent. So that way, if I know what Catherine has suggested and I know what Greg has suggested, then I can suggest something that complements all of that. I don't want to suggest something that is slightly different, but maybe getting at the same thing, but going through the back door instead of the front door when they've just mastered going in the front. So that's interdisciplinary, and it's very different than multidisciplinary, because multidisciplinary really just means you get a bunch of cooks in the kitchen and you hope it all comes out, and I'm here at 11, you're here at 1, you're here next day at 3, but you're not talking to each other.
Yeah.
In interdisciplinary, there's a sharing that goes on outside of the meetings, and there's a sharing that goes on with the mom, and it's an open dialogue. And I think that's what is so important, particularly in early intervention, when you have a child that probably is seeing a speech pathologist, a behavior analyst, a developmental therapist, a social worker, some other care provider in that mix. And if they're not all talking to each other, then that kiddo could be missing out on something, some really neat, clever way that Catherine has to connect all these that I'm missing out on if I'm not sharing with her.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's important.
And all the professions are learning from each other, which
Yes.
We have a question. This was spurred by Dr. Casey's portion, but the individual says, I'm open to hear from everyone. What are tips for facilitating groups, particularly group interventions via Zoom or telehealth? What are tips for facilitating group interventions via Zoom?
Well, what I can say is I haven't been doing group interventions for the reason that I have had some HIPAA concerns, that I can't necessarily control the privacy of what's happening at one group participant's location. I can't control who can see that. So I haven't felt particularly comfortable with that. So that's just one aspect to keep in mind if you are an entity that is dealing with HIPAA.
Greg, are you doing any group sessions via Zoom?
Yeah, I am. One of the things that we've done is be very clear about the regulating entities, and they have relaxed, some of the requirements. We're still concerned about the safety and the privacy, but participants have, and in these cases, these are individuals that I already was doing groups with. I haven't really
started any new groups. We've just kind of reconvened. And so, one of the big challenges is making sure that you're flexible and allow people time to actually get on and get in. And did a group actually yesterday, and one of the participants still hasn't figured out how to get his video up or even his mic, but he's there, he can hear us and he can chat. So we integrated him, I'm kind of his voice as he chats in. And some of I utilize music therapy and those components. And so we haven't totally integrated our drumming yet, but we have integrated some drumming too. And I think the participants appreciate as much as we can to kind of keep it familiar and what they're used to. And we can talk later about people who actually engage, whether it be group or individual telehealth. I'm seeing some evidence that some of these relationships can be a little more engaging. They can share in kind of more honest and open ways. Something about not physically being there to some degree seems to allow some people to feel a little more comfortable in sharing, a little more open, especially if they don't see you. The telephone, is very interesting. People will share and they will provide you with some authentic kind of information, and consequently you can use that. So I think, again, you want to be flexible. You do want to check and make sure that you're as responsive to the needs of the institution and individuals involved. Like I said, I'm most comfortable right now reconvening the groups that were already in place face-to-face, as opposed to starting with new individuals.
It's nice that you could continue with those groups. You didn't leave them hanging with COVID, so that's great. Here's another question. Really enjoyed today's webinar. As an SLP, Master Clinical Educator, we have had to quickly learn and support our graduate students in our university LSP program for providing telepractice to our child and adult clients. I hope the PowerPoints from today will be sent to all participants, because everything shared today will help my students and colleagues for continuing to provide high quality teletherapy services, especially the parent coaching activities, as long as I have consent from today's presenter in sharing your slides. Thank you. I think all of you have given consent, and the slides will be on the link that's provided by the FedEx Institute of Technology in the follow-up. But thank you so much. And you might be interested, there's a session on June 11th, training health profession students via remote learning, with Annie Cornelius, Susan Ellswick, and Belinda Fleming, a behavior analyst, a social worker, and a nurse, who will share how they're doing telehealth training of students in health professions. So you might be interested in that as well. And we will be offering that on the Tuesday, June 16th. No, I'm sorry, Thursday, June 11th. Let's see if there's another question. I don't think we have. Well, we have a couple more minutes left. Greg, I wanted to ask you, is there anything, maybe one thing specifically we should remember as we attempt to be sensitive in engaging our clients?
Well, I think I would go back to this whole idea about listening, and there's sort of multiple things to kind of listen for. Families are dealing with a lot of issues. There's the COVID virus, and then there's the racism virus. And so some of these things, they overlap and they intermix with each other. So there's economic issues, there are educational issues, a lot of children in spaces. There, summer camps haven't been, first they were educating, and now we've got to deal with summer camps and those kind of situations. And so there are a lot of those kind of issues that families are dealing with, in addition to their health issues. Their underlying health issues. So you have to kind of listen for this complexity too through your interactions with them. And like I said, the stress. There's this stress, and so there's concerns. In some of the the data we're seeing about increased concerns for domestic violence or in a partner and child stress, parental stress, role pieces. So I think we have to kind of we have to be careful, about, again, if we're being allowed to come into a family space, even though it's a virtual space, we want to create safe space for them to interact with us. And I don't want to come in as the police. I don't want to come in looking for problems. I want to be sensitive to what I may hear and see, and I want to use some tact and some interactions in regards to how I may be helpful. So I do think this whole idea of just kind of being cautious and listening for what I may be able to help with.
Thank you. I see a comment here. Someone is wondering about any telehealth being a bit too informal, especially with teens, given some of the ways technology is utilized. That's an interesting question. Anybody want to address that? Telehealth being too informal?
Well, I'll take a shot at that. I think there is a risk of that, but I do think you also have to allow a lot of leeway, because if you can engage a teenager, that's a good thing. And so you do have to help them understand, I've had conversations, where are you, man? Listen, can you move somewhere else? I'm having a little, you have to help them engage in a way where they understand this is an important dialogue. This is an important interaction we're having. So, let's respect it. But nevertheless, you have to, they want to do Duo, they want to do Google Duo, they want FaceTime. There's some other things I can't even remember right now that my team tells me about. Again, this environment of somewhat released or somewhat relaxed, I'll say, opportunities to use these different platforms needs to be respected. And again, it's difficult. Again, in some way, we're seeing more interactions because we don't have transportation barriers.
Right.
We're seeing more capacity for us to engage and be effective. So there's some trade-offs, but we have to kind of be careful. So while being sensitive to being too informal, I'm old school, so I have to be careful about being too rigid. My team helps me do that.
Right. We have one more question. Before I take this question, I wanted to remind the behavior analysts that the end code is 6869. 6869 for continuing education, just for the behavior analysts. Let me take this last question. Have any of the panelists taken on new clients during this time? If so, this is a good question, how do you build rapport virtually? We work with women who have experienced intimate partner violence, and our first individual meeting goes into details about their trauma and mental health history. We prefer Zoom so we can see each other and participants can see the questions, but we're concerned that telehealth may make people more nervous about sharing sensitive details, especially if it's difficult for them to maintain privacy in their home. Very interesting question. Anybody want to take that?
So I don't know that I can address all of those concerns, but I have taken on new clients during this time, and it is definitely been different. It requires some intentional and somewhat a little bit more overdoing of the stuff I would do in the clinic, because things like the nonverbal stuff doesn't come through as the nonverbal things I might do to communicate that I care, that I'm listening, that I'm engaged. Those don't come through as clearly. So I do feel like I had to just increase the verbal ways to express that I'm listening, and I can see that that's upsetting. That must have been really hard. Things like that. And it's so far so good, because part of the other component of that is that these are folks who are reaching out for help during this time. And so they're eager for the help too. So that helps kind of bridge that gap too, I think.
Okay. And we have one final question. How do you use telehealth with avoidant clients? What creative methods can you suggest? Telehealth with avoidant clients.
So this is one of the things we have really, it's been like okay. So one thing is that's one of those situations where you want to figure out, is this a situation where parent coaching is a more appropriate service delivery model? And maybe we have the parent take videos of interactions that are happening, not while I'm in the session with you. The other thing is we have learned green screens can be amazing. So if you start to look up, there's a Facebook group called Green Screen Speech. I don't know, I'm sure they ask if you're a speech pathologist before you get in there, but I don't know if they actually keep you out if you aren't. But they have done amazing things with green screens that have really made it look like the speech therapist is like hosting her own television show. And like they're amazing. So they have engaged a lot of the children that were really not interested in the screen until we started adding these components. But to me, it's a question of whether you want to do that or whether you want to move to a parent coaching model that doesn't require that child to sit there.
Well, thank you very much. We have reached the end of our time. I've learned a lot. I've enjoyed it. We've gotten a lot of positive comments. You've given all three of you have given practical suggestions and displayed your empathy and your concern and your care for your clients. And that really has come through. I'd like to thank Dr. Washington, Dr. Casey, Ms. Mendez, Rami Lotte and his colleagues at the FedEx Institute of Technology for helping us with this webinar. And thank you to the participants. Those of you who have joined us today. We thank you for everything you do to improve the health of everyone in our community. So thank you so much. We'll be sending out something to all the participants where you will have links to the webinar presentations, and you can do the survey so you can get CEUs. So we'll be signing off. Thank you, everybody. We've enjoyed it.